Hello, everyone. Welcome to South Asians in Sports. My name is Ashmir Prasad, and today we have a very exciting interview with Pratik Patel. Pratik is a registered dietitian through the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, as well as a certified strength and conditioning specialist through the National Strength and Conditioning Association. Pratik Patel is a coach focusing on improving the health, wellness, and fitness of South Asian professionals and athletes. He brings unique perspectives gained from his time in high-level elite sport of the NFL to enhance the health and performance of South Asians in the real world. He has had the opportunity to implement his strategies with multiple elite college teams and most recently the New York Giants football team, where they experienced the least number of games lost due to injury in their history during his tenure. Pratik has helped his clients implement effective health improvement strategies for long-term sustained success. So without further ado, let's get into the podcast episode. I'm happy to have the CEO of South Asians in Sports, the reason that we have this beautiful community, Neha and I. Hi, Neha. We're going to
Hello.
speak with Pratik Patel about his journey in the sports industry and his accomplishments, how he's helping South Asians, and get deep into focusing on your physical health. So I'm so excited to chat about everything and just learn about your background, Pratik. So I think let's kick it off with how you started.
Yeah, so my educational background is as a registered dietitian and got a master's degree in kinesiology. So I'd always been interested in sports ever since a young kid, played sports, had a sedentary period, and then got back into sports, which led me to fall in love with all things training related. So I knew I wanted to do something with health, wellness, and fitness in some capacity. So that led me into studying dietetics. And I knew the hospital life, the clinical setting wasn't necessarily for me. So when I learned that there's a whole industry and a whole side of health and wellness and nutrition where you could apply everything that with working with athletes in the same vein that I was kind of able to figure it out myself. I knew that right then and there, I wanted to follow that path, as far as I could go. So initially I thought the end all be all would be to, be a personal trainer in a gym and work with people athletically. And then I started learning that, there are athletic training facilities that have dietitians on staff, that have strength and conditioning coaches on staff. You have a variety of collegiate universities, athletic departments, professional teams that utilize the services of these staff members too. So lo and behold, I had some opportunities when I went back to K-State for my master's. I started working with the men's basketball team, getting some experience working with them, doing some small group coaching. And that led to an opportunity with Michigan State University. So I was able to work there for 3 years. And that led to the University of Oregon, where I was able to work there for 3 years as well. And ultimately was able to find my way somehow in the NFL as an assistant coach on the staff of the Giants for almost 4 years.
Well, I mean, first of all, I went to Oregon, so go Ducks. So I think to follow up with that, it's a journey that is not taken often within the South Asian community. I'd love to hear how you took your NFL professional career and took it to a next level, which is giving back, helping the community, and just doing what you do now with South Asian athletes.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate to have the career that I had, but ultimately, you always feel that there's something missing or something more that you need to do or want to do. And everybody's path is different, and, grateful for the opportunities that I had. But growing up, this might be the case for both of you. What I saw around me with my older family members was not a lot of graceful aging. So unfortunately, as of right now, all four of my grandparents have passed. My mom's dad passed pretty early. My dad's dad passed pretty early. My mom's mom lived till she was over 94 years old. So there's something about, that maternal matriarch, which I'm sure my mom's hopefully going to be able to do the same. But, I saw a lot of disease, a lot of, once family members got to the point where they're retired, they just weren't as vibrant anymore. Health and wellness wasn't anything that was really set as a precedent that people were taking advantage of, but that kind of definitely went downhill once people started getting older. So I experienced it at a very young age. And growing up, in my 20s and 30s and seeing some of my older family members just kind of succumb to the standard things that are facing a lot of South Asians, where we have a high prevalence of cardiovascular disease, more so than any other ethnic group across the globe. We are very predisposed to diabetes. We have hypertension issues. There's a lot of physical inactivity. That's something that was really resounding with me, because my career path, the things that really mattered a lot to me, revolved around health and wellness. So personally, it wasn't anything that I felt like I would ever succumb to. But all around me, cousins, family members that are close in the same age, my mom's brothers and sisters, my dad's brothers and sisters, were having health problems, at ages where they potentially shouldn't have to deal with some of these things. So as I transitioned out of the NFL, trying to figure out what exactly I really wanted to do, how can I leave my mark on, not only my family community, but, ultimately the world, it started becoming more and more clear, hey, there's this massive gap in the knowledge base of South Asians where we're very much unhealthy as a whole. Now the population all across this country and all across the globe is facing similar things, but it's very resounding within the South Asian community. And there's 1.5 billion of us. We make up 25% of the population across the globe. And, we're definitely not as healthy as we can be. And this really became something that was very personal to me once my son was born. So he's around 14 months old. So, he was born last August. And in my mind, I'm kind of thinking, if I had two wishes, the first would be for him to have a lot of time left with my older family members. And in reality, that's not necessarily the case. It'd be great to have another 20 or 30 years with everybody to get a chance for him to meet them, get to know them, but that's not necessarily the case. And the second is if I could go back in time, I would love to take all the knowledge that I have now, the things that I've learned in health and wellness and fitness and sport and, high performance, and teach these principles to my family members when they were much younger. So they would be able to do something about it and maybe not have to deal with some of the things that they are at the moment.
Mm.
So that's why it's really come from, going to the top of the NFL and elite sport to really now transitioning out and seeing what is it that I can do for our community and help supporting them.
Yeah, thank you. I have a follow-up for that question. So I really love that you are committed to helping the diaspora, to getting DCs fit, physically as well as nutritionally. I'm wondering if we could just give us a little bit of a bird's eye view of some of the trends you see. Like, what are the misconceptions people have about South Asian bodies compared to Western physicality? Is there really a big difference? Do Caucasians have a completely different genetic makeup? I often hear in rooms that I go in, oh, us Stacey's, we're unathletic. We all have pot bellies. We can't put on muscle. Is that true in your understanding? Are there things we can do as a average, South Asian male living in this country that he needs to do differently than his Caucasian counterpart to build muscle, maintain muscle mass?
Yeah, that's a great question. And truth be told, doing a lot of deep dives into the research. So a lot of it isn't just, hey, what have I experienced observationally? We want to always make sure that it is confirmed by, what's in the evidence, what's been published, what's been researched, because if you have that combination between the subjective and the objective, it allows for you to make really great protocols and interventions to help support that. So the truth be told is, from a predisposition standpoint, from the research and how we've evolved over the course of 10,000 years is, we are famine adapted for the most part. So, we weren't surviving against other tribes and cultures and fighting and, ducking animals and this, and that, and the third. It was basically who had food, who was able to survive the famines. And then you continue on and you have a family and you pass that on from generation to generation. So what we've learned from that, through the studies, the anthropometric studies, what's been published is generally compared to some of our counterparts. And it doesn't mean that we can't have success. It just means we have to be really smart and intentional about how we take care of ourselves, how we train, how we eat. And we really have to focus on that instead of doing what everybody else is doing or what's been popularized by the media or the latest guru or a popular podcaster. So ultimately, based on some of our counterparts, now, whether it's with other Asians or we're talking about Caucasians, Eastern Europeans, we do tend to have less muscle mass and less lean mass, less bone mass for the same BMI size, for the same size. So we tend to typically store more body fat in and around the midsection. So we have central adiposity, we have visceral adiposity, we have hepatic adiposity, subcutaneous adiposity that is a little bit higher compared to some of the other racial and ethnic groups all across the globe. But just because that seems to be a presiding trend in what we are predisposed to,
Yeah.
doesn't mean you can't train and you can't take care of your health to reach certain physical goals, to reach certain body composition goals, to reach certain metabolic health goals. So I think a lot of times we get lost in, I'm healthy because I haven't been diagnosed with a specific condition. When in reality is, if we actually look at what's going on underneath the hood, top to bottom, and we get the proper data on us, we can say, like, without a shadow of a doubt, like, hey, I'm not as healthy as I thought I could be. This is something I can do about it. So honestly, there is a big difference between our genetic makeup and our background and how we potentially would want to go about approaching training, what we should do from a lifestyle perspective, what we should do from a nutrition and supplementation perspective. All the principles are the same, but you have to individualize it per situation. The same way, I would do it with any athlete that was working in the NFL, coming from a variety of different backgrounds. Not everybody's going to do the same workout, not everybody's going to get the same recommendations. And then I can make it a proper, recommendation for you.
Is that what you're doing now in your business? Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing after leaving the NFL?
Yeah, it evolved from, I would have athletes and agents and GMs and coaches reach out, because now I wasn't bound to just working with one team. And I think people resonated with the way I went about things, the information that I shared, building up a name and a brand on social media. It's the good and bad with, what's going on with social media today. And it started with athletes, and, that was fun for an extent, but it's like, look, I've already done this. I don't think it's really satisfying for me. And then it transitioned into getting connected to the world of, startups and founders and high performers and VCs. And that was fun for a little while, but ultimately it's like, anybody can do this. Everybody who wants to call themselves a health and wellness coach wants to target these same people because, yeah, they're very driven. They're very type A. They've got money. You don't have to have 50 to 75 to 100 clients to, do well for yourself. But at the same time, it just wasn't very fulfilling for me. And that's when I transitioned out to say, like, look, somebody really should spearhead this on a global scale, start small and then be able to find the best way to scale. So what I'm doing is really working more one-on-one with a variety of different, South Asian and Indian professionals, whether it's somebody who owns their own small business, somebody that works in finance, somebody on the West Coast that's a doctor from a variety of different backgrounds, somebody that has a youth athlete that is very talented, that needs somebody not only just with the background that I have, but somebody that can speak to, your you were first generation born in this country. Now your child is second generation born in this country, but you still have a lot of the cultural and religious and familial influences. And working with somebody on the outside that just doesn't understand that, it's going to give you some general recommendations.
I personally experienced that. I needed a Pratik in my life when I was training, when my sisters and I were training, because they just didn't understand what it was, like, what our food was, what the benefits were, what our mentalities were like. And that was my next question. Now that you are working with South Asians and you're kind of working with people, I'm hearing across the gamut in terms of what their vocation is, what their athletic conditioning is, are you seeing mental self-belief systems that are very different than non-South Asians? Like, do you kind of understand, or is there a stereotype or a trend you see with South Asians on how they approach fitness, how they approach their health, even wanting to spend money on health, right, and fitness? Are you seeing things that are different than you would with non-South Asians?
I think so, in the extent that a lot of South Asians are very driven. A lot of the people that come to me or work with me are type A, and I'm that way when it comes to health and fitness and wanting to really do big things. And I think that's what aligns really closely with the people I work with. So that's something that I think is a very big positive. But when it comes to health and fitness, if it isn't somebody that is an athlete who already knows, like, look, I've got a lot of talent. I might not have the same size or strength right now in this time frame of my life, but I potentially can get there. I think it's reprogramming a lot of the beliefs and misconceptions that not necessarily rampant, but that people sometimes have about not knowing how to leverage our background. What makes us unique is good and bad, and you can say that about any cultural background, any religious background across the globe. And sometimes it's not having that much awareness about these are the areas that you really want to focus on and lean on. And instead of this, not knowing what kind of workouts to do, not being as well versed in terms of how to eat, the importance of supplementation, because, the way you asked this question, how do I work with somebody one-on-one? It's, taking a lot of the same principles and methods that we were working with NFL athletes is, look, I've got to learn as much as I can about you in the background. So I need as much subjective information on you, but I also need to learn as much as I can about your current physiology, your health status. So I got to get as much objective information from a variety of different assessments and tests. And then when I have that information, I can create an N of one plan for you. So it's not, copy and paste from what happened with somebody else. It's like, look, everybody's very much different and very unique. So what I tend to spend a little bit more time with, my South Asian clients is explaining more about our background and history and culture and showing them why the recommendations are the way that they are. So, we take our genetic background. I understand your epigenetic lifestyle, how you live your life, your cultural influences and factors, what you go through on a daily basis and schedule, and then craft the plan to be able to suit what's sustainable for you. Ultimately, it's trying to craft that N of one experience as much as possible to help support somebody to get them to their goals.
Excellent.
So I think this question is like a combination. Social media is helpful and not helpful in the ways of delivering information. And I have actually seen a lot of Indian content creators from India delivering the type of information that you are also sharing. And it also relates to our diets. So many Indians are vegetarian. And so I'm sure you come across that when you're crafting this plan as you just described. So I'm curious to hear, as vegetarianism is like a huge part of the culture, but how do you help Indians really understand where they can adjust and achieve the goals that they're trying to achieve?
Yeah, I mean, a good number of my clients are vegetarian. A lot of my family members are vegetarian. A lot of my family members come to me for advice, which being vegetarian actually is kind of one of those good and bad situations. It's good because it actually gives you, like, look, if we're trying to increase protein intake, if we want to make sure that we're getting certain micronutrients, certain vitamins and minerals, that we don't have a ton of options, that we have to lean in on, X number of ones. And we want to make sure that, since you don't eat meat, you don't eat animal products, depending on somebody's how much of a vegetarian they might end up being. Well, that just gives us, like, hey, these are the options that you have in front of you. And there's no excuse. Like, if you want to be healthy, if you want to improve your markers and, increasing your protein intake, getting plenty of fiber, this, that, and the third, in terms of when it comes to nutrition, like, this is what you have to do. And I think there are big misconceptions where people think the only way you can be successful and healthy is if you eat meat versus not. Now, you can be very healthy. You can live a long time and live a good, long quality of life doing either, as long as you do it right. So, of course, nutrition is a big aspect of healthy aging, but there are a lot of other variables that come into play, which are just as important. When you talk about lifestyle medicine, a big component of it is physical activity, movement, a feeling of willingness and belonging, and having a good social circle, having a sense of purpose, not engaging in a lot of, high risk behaviors, alcohol, tobacco, variety of different drugs, really taking care of recovery and sleep. So again,
and stress, right?
Stress, managing, adapting to stress, because you're never really going to eliminate stress. It's how does the body perceive it? It could be good stress, which is eustress. It could be bad stress, which is distress. It's how can you diagnose and think of it and use it for your own advantage? And that comes into play with a lot of the athletes that I end up working with, because look, you're an athlete. You're going to be engaged in physical stress and mental stress regardless of time of year. It just depends on how much you're experiencing.
You've been in this industry for a while now. I'm wondering what you are seeing now with the South Asian population that maybe you didn't see 10 years ago in terms of health, fitness, conditioning, nutrition, athletics. Are there trends that you're noticing, good and bad?
Yeah, I think the awareness piece is definitely increasing. So you have a lot more athletes coming up from the youth ranks now that are currently in college that are playing at a high level, D1 athletes, people getting scouted for great opportunities. And it's not just limited to what's going on here in the States. It's starting to hit a lot more in India. They've had this resurgence of, fitness and wellness. I mean, you've got a ton of people over there. So obviously, when we look at the total population, you're going to have people that are definitely going to understand the importance of health, wellness, and fitness and continue to strive for it, continue to advocate for it, which is great. But now compared to the total population, it's still a very small piece.
Sure.
I think, again, the next generation, so, people not of my age, but the youth athletes, the kids that are coming about are getting more opportunities. They know that if, you can harness talent at a younger age, then you're going to get that opportunity to not only do well in high school, but play in college with the potential of, hopefully we have more names that are breaking through in professional sport, not only for individual sports, but team sports here in the States. And it's not limited to just the athletes. You have people that are involved in the coaching and the mentoring, being able to support the growth of South Asian Indian athletes. And so, I was very fortunate to have a 12-year career in elite sport. Now you've got a variety of other coaches that are head coaches of sports teams across the collegiate ranks. They're now working in the NBA, they're in the NFL, they're in the NHL, which is really awesome to see, because growing up, that never resounded with me. I'd never be able to turn on a game, and, I'm a huge Michael Jordan fan. So watching the Bulls or watching, the Niners and Chiefs growing up, I would never think like, oh, there's an Indian coach on the sideline. It's not exactly where we want to be, but compared to where it was 10 to 15 years ago, there are a lot more. You have many more athletes coming about. You have people that are coaching, not just sport coaches, but they're involved in the development. You've got strength conditioning coaches, you've got athletic trainers, you have sports physicians that are involved in the care. I don't know if you know Robbie Sika. I mean, he was very heavily involved with the Minnesota Timberwolves for a very long time until he transitioned out to, he's going to save the world with his startup. But it's great to see that, and I'm hoping it continues to empower young kids who are really drawn to sport like I was. But ultimately, my goal is to be able to give that young athlete or person, whomever it is, that same opportunity, but with the knowledge that I have to say, look, if it's within you and you're ready to work hard for it and the potential is there, somebody can help you develop with, your growth along the way.
Pratik, you're someone who has trained with some of the most elite athletes in the world, right? Who can run the fastest, who are the strongest, who are the most agile. What do you want to tell the South Asian athlete, the kid or the young adult, male or female, who's trying to compete at the highest level in their sport? What can be their edge coming from the background that we share?
Yeah, no, I love that question. And I think one of the biggest things that I've seen that helps set us apart is if there's something that you're really into, and I was this way with a variety of different things. I just wasn't really good at the sport aspect of it. But as I mentioned before, a lot of the clients, a lot of people I work with are so very driven. They're very type A, they're achievement oriented, that, with the athletes that I've worked with at the highest level, like, yeah, you have to have some level of physicality and skill to be able to get to where you are. But the ones that separate themselves from just the average NFL player are the ones that have just this mental toughness and makeup, where they're willing to do whatever it takes. They're willing to stick it out. They've been through tough things, so they know how to handle adversity, and they take care of themselves really well. So growing up, some of these youth athletes that come from our background might not necessarily be the fastest or the strongest. And look, it's inherent with what we're kind of predisposed to. It doesn't mean that you can't get to that level. It's just you might not achieve it early on. But we see this quite a bit with a lot of athletes that I was working with in college, and then you see them get to the NFL. They had been so physically dominant for a really long time. When they ultimately get to a point where the competition levels out, that physical dominance isn't good enough anymore. And they don't know how to handle adversity because they haven't built up, being pushed around and having to work harder because, maybe you're not the biggest in the room and maybe you're not the most skilled, but you have a total package when put all together makes you somebody that's you're a force to be reckoned with. So being able to harness that and cultivate that while simultaneously, again, learning how to take care of yourself, develop your physical attributes, develop your fitness levels can be something that's very powerful, because it happens at the highest level. So it's not always just about who's the strongest, who's the fastest. Again, you have outliers. I think the most recent thing that's come about, if anybody's a football fan, is just what Saquon did 2 weeks ago with the move and then the backwards jump. And The funny thing is I got a chance to work with Saquon for 2 years. In his rookie year, it was great because he was so compliant. He listened to everything, and he was rookie of the year at over 2,000 scrimmage yards. We would see a lot of this stuff at practice. So again, you have these outliers that are one of ones. So you don't want to compare yourself to those people because again, even him with his background, he's an outlier amongst outliers.
Mm-hmm.
That mental makeup, and you can see it from, again, I like to reference certain athletes that I grew up watching, your Joe Montana, Jerry Rice, Michael Jordan. They weren't the most physical. Now the skill level was very high, but what set them apart completely, head and shoulders above everything, and Tom Brady's in that category too, is the mental makeup, and the drive that they have. So I think that's definitely something that is very much within a lot of us. And, I see it with almost every single one of my clients that I work with. I had it in a certain aspect, but it wasn't specifically for sport application in terms of being an athlete. But I definitely think that's really like our secret weapon.
As a South Asian in the sports industry, and specifically in your industry, how has your experience been? And, how do you feel now out in your professional space and doing it personally yourself?
Going through it, you never really stop and think about it. Now, it is when you're an athlete, when you're coaching, when you're in the space, you don't really have time to just stop and reflect. And I kind of wish I would have done a little bit more of that because sports is so go, go, go. And to a fault, when you don't take a stop to take a breath and be like, hey, let me evaluate things critically. Let me ask somebody else from an external perspective to give me some advice. And that's what I ended up, the second I transitioned out, I went back to a lot of the players I used to work with, a lot of the other staff members, a lot of the other coaches. And I was like, what were your perceptions of what were you doing? What were your perceptions of me? What was good? What was bad? What did I do really well? What could have I improved upon? Because ultimately I didn't know if I was ever going to get back in what capacity. It's just, I never got that opportunity to stop and get evaluated. I think that's one of the big issues that you see with, the misconceptions of elite sport or professional sport. Like sometimes we just don't do a good enough job, or the leadership just doesn't sit us down and explain like, hey, this is the good and bad, and this is what we can improve. Sometimes we just have to do that internally. And I was constantly doing that. And I think the feedback I got from a variety of different people, but more so from, connections that I would have, on Instagram or Twitter and LinkedIn, from people that are of South Asian background that were like, hey, I've been following your career since you were at Oregon, or I saw a news article or something about you getting hired with the Giants. I think that was so cool. My son watches the team and he can't believe that. Seeing other young coaches in the space that are either in strength conditioning or athletic trainings, we're like, hey, I've been following your journey. I can't believe somebody was able to make it. And I'm like, there's nothing special about me on paper. I would like to think so, but truth be told, there's not. It's, takes a lot of luck, but it also takes a lot of drive and determination. And I think, again, like I mentioned before, one thing that really sets us apart is having a very, very strong type A personality, to where we don't want to disappoint anybody. We don't want to disappoint ourselves. We don't want to disappoint our parents.
I'm glad you said that out loud. Yeah.
Which is true. And to me, I was like, I would do, if I want to be the best, I'm going to go out there and do it. If I say I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. But now, ultimately, what I want to do is, look, I've conquered sport. I've conquered elite sport in a very unique way. But now I want to do it for, the South Asian people. Not just be an influencer who makes videos. It's like, look, I'm in talks with a variety of different doctors all across the globe in cardiology that work in a variety of different sectors. Like, what is it that we can do to advocate for our people? And it's not, we already know what the data says on us. I kind of went over some of it, the predispositions we have, the risk of hypertension and metabolic syndrome and visceral fat and cardiovascular disease and insulin resistance. We already know all that. We need solutions. We don't need to be listening to Huberman or a TA. Like, we need somebody who's going to advocate specifically for us. And that's what I want to do, with the collaborations I'm making, with the businesses I'm building. From here on out, it's, what is it that I can do for our people? One, it could be speaking specifically to maybe the older generation of the parents that, a lot of what I heard growing up, and it wasn't to the fault of my parents, you guys probably heard this too, is, look, you want to make sure you study really well. You want to get good grades because you want to get into a good school. You want to study a good program to get into a good career field. So obviously we hold certain things in really high regard. Being in the medical field, being a doctor is like the end all be all for all Indian parents. Or you can become a lawyer, you can become an engineer. And I think a lot of times it's because our parents don't want to see us fail. They want the best for us. They want us not have to work and slum and struggle, the way that, they may have, or their parents had, because they didn't choose to go into medicine and they had to open up a small business and had to deal with something along those lines. My parents did that, and I love them for it. Maybe more so if they had a medical background.
For sure.
Because there was a lot that I got exposed to and got to experience that I probably wouldn't have been able to. But ultimately, my parents wanted me to be an engineer because I was very good in math and science. I excelled quite well, but it just wasn't in the cards. So I think a lot of times you have these younger generation kids that are very talented, very skilled, that could become, the next high profile superstar, or, maybe branch off and do something very unique and different. But because of self-fulfilling prophecy, because of what the parents are telling the children, like, you won't have success if you do that.
Right.
So they have it in their head, well, I can't deviate from that. But ultimately, the funny thing that I start seeing and get now is, a lot of my clients end up becoming Indian doctors, and a lot of them are kind of just burnt out on that because they only did it because they did it to satisfy their parents, and then they worked really hard, because being a doctor is not easy. You're spending a ton of time, depending on where you're at in the medical system.
Sure.
Fitness and health promotion isn't something that's very much taught at the same level or encouraged at the same level of schooling. That, you go 20 or 30 years and then you look, you're 40 years old, you're 50 years old, and your health is a mess and you need help. And ultimately, I want to be that person to help you if you are South Asian. The second is when we're talking to everybody, all South Asians in general, in terms of really being empowered to take care of your health, wellness, and fitness. And I'm not naive. I'm not going to save 1.5 billion South Asians. It might even be 0.0001% of that. So, and that's the reality of it. But the goal is, there are very small things, important things that can be done now that are going to pay dividends long term. And what I see with a lot of the clients that I talk with is my dad, my grandpa, my ba, my cousin, my uncle, my this, that, whether they experienced it when they were 6 years old, I just talked to an Indian doctor today, and he said his mom passed away when he was in college, 18 years old, heading into med school. And, she was somewhat healthy, but it was heart issues. And I'm like, I can't imagine, that happening when you're just that young. There are things that are very specific to what we should be doing to take care of our health. Again, once you understand our predispositions, once you understand the data, once you have objective data on yourself.
What are those specific things? I know that you're saying specific, but I'm hearing that there might be some general things that we need to watch out for as South Asians because of our predisposition. Are there things you're saying that we need to just avoid altogether?
Not necessarily avoid. So as I mentioned before, the South Asian phenotype has been studied, and we're very prevalent based on our size, even with the same BMI as maybe a Caucasian person or an Eastern European person. Sure. We have less muscle mass. We have smaller bone mass, less bone mineral density. So we tend to store a lot more fat.
Yes.
So that just means that our bodies aren't as physically fit as we would want them to be. So
are they not as physically fit, or do they not look as physically fit?
A little bit of both. So they've done studies. So not a ton of studies, but they've done some general studies in terms of hand grip strength, endurance capacity, cardiovascular capacity. We tend to unfortunately score on the lowest end when compared to other ethnic groups, and definitely when compared to Caucasians as well. So but a lot of that actually has to do with what our natural habits are. So even though these predispositions are there, like, I would put myself up against any other 40-year-old with 2 kids. Sure. In terms of my fitness level. Like, look, I'm not going to win a powerlifting contest, but overall, like, when you combine all the aspects of health, like,
yeah,
I hope to live a really long time for my son and hopefully his kids. It's physical inactivity. There's high prevalence, even in these.
Can I just challenge you on that? Just pound for pound, right? South Asian athlete, former Soviet bloc athlete, right? And this is like me, right? I'm talking about myself right now, right? And the amount of hours I needed to put in the gym, right, to get the strength, muscle mass that my counterpart probably was naturally born with, because they all come out like machines there, right? Are you saying that she would still pound for pound be stronger? Or are you saying that you have to just work that much more to get to her base level of strength?
You have to work that much more. So there are some interesting studies that have been done when they look at just general cardiovascular recommendations for moderate to vigorous physical activity. The World Health Organization, WHO, and the ACSM have very similar guidelines, 150 minutes a week. And this is general stuff. This doesn't take into consideration how much resistance training should you do, where do you start in resistance training journey, how much mass, this, that, and the third. So what they found is, should it be ethnic specific? So the same guidelines that the WHO gives and the ACSM gives, should Indians and South Asians do the same? So what they've actually found is, to reach the same 150-minute level, you have anywhere from 233 minutes to 260 minutes of activity that we have to do to reach the same cardiovascular fitness level. So if you equate that, it's 1.5 times. So they say that that's 10 to 15 minutes more per day. So another thing to talk about is our habits. Now, there haven't been a lot of studies done here in the States and North America about general nutrition. I mean, again, we're a small percentage of the population and not a lot of people are specifically studying that. But India's done a great job of that. And there are a lot of parallels that we can see what's happening over there in South Asia and India versus here. And what they find is average calorie consumption is around 2,500 calories. Only 6 to 8% of that is coming from protein. Their recommendations for protein per day is around, they say, 60 to 80 grams. And I think that's still very low. And I work with all populations across. So metabolic athletes, that's still way too low. The average person is not even meeting those low recommendations. So it goes into play of, why do we see some of these metabolic issues? There's a significantly high percentage, way too much consumption of refined carbohydrates, and not just fruits and vegetables. Even the wealthier people in these countries, they're still not taking care of themselves.
We're all eating Maggi noodles. Yeah.
Can
you tell me about this, the second piece? Because do they not look as athletic, or are they not that look, right? We have social media has a lot to do with this, but just generally we think that an athlete has to have 6-pack abs and they have to have like really beefy muscles. That's sort of our Western perception of what an athlete should look like. And you said, well, not really, 2 parts. Can you touch more on that? Like, we've been told that Indian men are effeminate, or they're not as strong, or as manly. We've been told this our whole lives. And the same with women. Indian women are soft and curvy. They're not athletic. They don't look athletic. Can you touch on that?
It's different. If you're somebody that doesn't engage in any physical activity, like, obviously, like, that person's not athletic. They're not going to be able to handle the demands of some, like, playing tennis with you. Like, yeah, good luck. But if you are an athlete and you do engage in resistance training and you play a sport, regardless of how you look, I think sometimes that's a big misconception. With everybody equates the most jacked female and male as being the best athlete. Well, yeah, building up strength and building up physical fitness does allow you to do certain things, but it doesn't automatically mean you're going to be the best athlete. And I think one of the best recent depictions of this is, again, I hail in Kansas City. I'm from Kansas City, of the country. And in my mind, the best football player I've seen, he hasn't having a great year this year, but Patrick Mahomes. So a lot of videos of Patrick Mahomes. He's 6'2", 225 pounds. So not a small dude by any stretch of the imagination. And he proudly says, like, look, I got a dad bod. I'm like, this guy is one of the freakiest athletes that I've ever seen do incredible things. He's quick. He just trucked, in the San Francisco game, they had this guy who's a physical specimen that has all these great Instagram pics. He was head to head with Patrick in the end zone, and Patrick trucked him. And then there's a bunch of memes after the fact, like, this guy got trucked by Pat. Like, come on. So ultimately, like, look, if you have skill, and he's mentally, like, he's one of those athletes that are up there for sure, like the Jordan Brady level.
Sure, because he was a little bit smaller.
Yeah, he had to work a little bit harder because he didn't have, that. So, and again, a lot of the times, and I always make fun of a lot of people that post on social media about this, they always love, like, these videos of squatting and throwing and lifting and X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, look, I'll tell you straight up, the best athletes in the sports that I work with were never the strongest. They were never the most aesthetic, and they were never the freakiest looking. They would sometimes not even be considered as, the cover models or whatnot, whether it's male or female. They were just ones that were the best at their sport and that had a mindset that set them apart.
What are some tips and some, like, health tips you're sharing with people as they come to you for their parents or for their grandparents to, like, help implement in their day-to-day lives?
Yeah, I think for this generation, it kind of just boils down to 3 things. One is, a lot of the stuff I had mentioned before about low lean mass, low muscle mass. This definitely becomes more prevalent as we age. And this is seen in all ethnic backgrounds across the globe, where you lose muscle mass, you lose bone mineral density, and it does put you at risk. And, I've got older family members that have had falls, and that's something that, very much we're worried more about that than anything else. Obviously heart disease is something that's in the background, but look, you have a bad fall, you do something to the femoral artery, that's it. So being able to engage in strength training is very, very important, not only for everybody as we age, but very specifically for our population, knowing that the data shows we are a little bit under muscled just out of the gate if you're not somebody that engages in regular physical activity and proper training. The second is we need to make sure that, protein intake and certain nutrients are very much a priority and a focus. Again, that's one of these things that it's kind of imparted on us from a cultural standpoint. The data that I just kind of mentioned about India's protein consumption, India is the lowest in terms of all the countries across the globe. America is the highest. It actually still falls lower than what my recommendations would be, and about 93% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy. So strength training, increasing protein intake as we get older, and just staying active and moving. Walking. You don't have to engage in cardio. You don't have to start running. You don't have to buy a fancy Peloton or anything else like that. If we're talking about what is it that can move the needle to help us, get healthy and stay healthy, I would say those three really big things are a very great starting point. Now, those three things by far and away would do wonders for people in our background.
Thanks again for tuning in, everyone. And as we explained, Pratik has a wealth of knowledge in the health and wellness space. Be sure to follow on South Asians in Sports to see more interviews like this on all of our social platforms. And we look forward to seeing you guys again. Thank you.